Nice. We are here with John Rees from UK, London, from the Stop the War Coalition. He is a co-founder member of Stop the War Coalition, one of the most historical and large movement in UK fighting for peace, against rearm, against any kind of war and for human rights. I met him during the campaign to free Assange, and I met a person that for me become like a hero, a mentor, because his passion, because his way to speak to the people about this kind of issues and the human right, the freedom of speech. So thanks to you for inviting me here.
You're welcome.
We were speaking during the lunch about the situation, the politics situation in Italy and in Europe. We share the view that some movements that fight against rearm, against war, sometimes are very fragmented, divided, and we have to find a way to unite because the basic needs are the same. Even if we come from different party views, there are a lot of people that need the same things, the same basic things. What point we are in this fight, in this particularly complicated moment?
Well, I think we're at a decisive turning point, really, because the entire European establishment has decided to react to Donald Trump's demand that they pay more for defense expenditure, for arms expenditure, by saying yes. And not only are we saying yes, but we're going to pay more on armaments than the United States pays on armaments. So Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, is saying we'll have to pay 5% of GDP. The United States only pays 3.5% of GDP. So while the European establishment sort of tuts and says, oh, well, we don't really like Trump, actually what they're doing is exactly what Trump has asked them to do. And this is going to be absolutely disastrous for the provision of health, education, housing, decent jobs right across the European continent. And we haven't had a moment like this since the Second World War. We haven't had a moment where, even during the Cold War, where the entire European establishment said, we're just going to chuck money we're just going to funnel money, billions of pounds, into rearmament, and to face what? I mean, I've got no brief for Vladimir Putin, but Vladimir Putin has just lost a war in the Ukraine. He's not going to get to Warsaw or Berlin or Calais anytime soon. So they are dangerously talking up the threat of war.
A lot of people are asking themselves, who's the enemy?
Yeah.
What's the reason about all this emergency they scream about?
Exactly. And so I think there's a very widespread feeling right across the European continent that we're being asked to pay with already very, very hard-pressed social services, very, very hard-pressed and threadbare health services, a disastrously broken education system. We're being asked to pay for this absolutely irresponsible rearmament. So I think there's a decisive moment coming here, and we've been involved in the Stop the War Coalition with some very, very good French MPs, and we've launched a European-wide call for peace. We're launching it as the people of Europe demand peace, and we've got hundreds of thousands of signatures from right across the European continent now, from MPs and trade union leaders to activists right across the continent. And we're going to hold the first European-wide conference in Paris on the 5th of October. And then a few months later, we're going to host a sister conference in London, where we think there will be thousands of people coming together from across the continent. And I think what we're trying to do eventually is to recreate some of the energy and some of the coordination that was there during the European Social Forum movement. And I remember being here in Florence when the European Social Forum took place. The old railway station, we had tens of thousands of activists in that rally. That's where we launched the call for the Global Day of Action against the Iraq War, which was the single biggest global day of action ever. So we're not there yet, but that's what we're aiming at.
I think, yeah, I agree, because we need to unite all these fragmented movements and collectives under the same flag. 5-10 points that can unite people without any kind of specific party issues or political issues. These must unite people and not give them another possibility to split in different parties and movements.
Well, this is the way that we built the Stop the War coalition in Britain. I come from a particular part of the left. I come from the revolutionary Marxist left. But we work in the Stop the War coalition with people from the Green Party. We work with people from the Labour Party. We work from people who are in no political party. People who are in the trade unions. People who are in single issue campaigns. Because I've always thought it's important. If you're on the left, you've got to ask yourself two questions. What do I think? What does my party think? And I'm very much in favour of people asking themselves that question and being able to freely articulate what their party thinks, their analysis, their strategy. Absolutely, that's the right of everybody who's a political activist. But I also think you've got to ask yourself a second question. And the second question is this: not just what do I think, but what are other people who disagree with me thinking? And on what points can we agree to take action together? And those two things aren't opposites. They aren't incompatible. You can both pursue your party's goals and at the same time cooperate on a limited number of areas where you agree with other people who, on quite a lot of other issues, you actually disagree. Now, I work very closely with a lot of Labour MPs in Stop the War Coalition. I don't agree with what the Labour government is doing. I don't agree with being in the Labour Party. But they agree with me that we need an anti-war movement. And that's enough. That's enough sufficient for the day.
Yes. Yes, we have to go step by step to create something and build a big movement like this. Because if we get stuck in small issues and differences, we will go forever on this way. The system, as we call it, will always win in future, because what they look for is divide et impera. We'll find every way to make us think that we are different. And we can get together, because if we understand that we have 10 basic rights to defend together, we become a big danger for them.
And our enemies, they work on this principle. They all have differences amongst themselves, between the military, the politicians, the lawyers. They all have differences. But we very rarely see them, because they are very united when it comes to dealing with us. So, when we see Elon Musk and Donald Trump arguing in public, we go, wow, that's unusual, because it really is unusual. Usually that happens behind closed doors and we never see it.
Exactly.
Because they are very concerned that when we look at them, they look united. And we need to learn that lesson. We should have discussion and debate. That's part of the movement. That's a democratic right. But against them, we should look united.
Yes, of course. I totally agree. I have a question from our friend Patrick Boylan, the editorial group of AllertaMedia, and he writes for Manifesto for Indipendente in Italy. And he says, the Stop Rearm Europe campaign says that the EU is bent on provoking war with Russia, claiming a EU Parliament document that instead it is Russia that wants to wage war against the European Union. But the campaign lacks proof that the real instigator is the European Union and the USA. How can we show that the current conflict is a deliberate provocation by the US and European country? And how can we show that behind the scenes it is above all the bankrupt British monarchy and establishment that won war with Russia to grab its energy resources, while the USA also wants war, but for geopolitical reasons, to weaken Russia and thus make it easier for them, USA, to take on China? What do you think about?
Well, I think context is king. The mainstream media depends on making context-less statements, of presenting people with an argument
outside the context,
that has no broader social context and, critically, no historical context. So we have to be the people that educate people about what the context is.
Give them the links to understand and to connect all the dots.
Give them the whole picture, or as much of the whole picture as we can. And that doesn't have to be a long, complex argument. You know, once you say to people, listen, Russia has got an economy the same size as Spain's. Does anybody think that even if Spain wanted to take over the whole of Europe, it's economically capable of sustaining the military to do that? Nobody thinks that.
Exactly.
And that in itself, once you say to people, look, this economy, it isn't Germany in 1939 was the biggest economy or the second biggest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Yes, they had that capacity. But there's no evidence that Russia has that capacity. There's not even very much evidence that it has that desire.
Exactly.
And in any case, even if it had that desire, it's just catastrophically come undone. It spent 3 years getting 18% of Ukrainian territory. So really, you know, if it can't make it to Kiev, it's not going to make it to Warsaw, Berlin, Paris, or Calais. So
someone in Italy told they are going to Portugal. So.
maybe the oligarchs are going to Portugal on holiday, but they're not going there to militarily occupy.
Exactly. The problem is that Putin move outside this box will be arrested.
Yeah.
Not the same with Netanyahu, in example, but for Putin, yes. The same reason why we give, and not the same with Israel. Yeah. Israel can do whatever they want, and nobody say nothing to Netanyahu.
And the other is the post-Cold War context that we have to say. You know, at the end of the Cold War, Russia still had satellites in the entirety of Eastern Europe. Part of the agreement, famously the agreement with Gorbachev, was that the NATO alliance wouldn't go further east. But if you
stay there, we stay here, and that's it.
But that isn't what happened. As we all know, NATO is knocking at the doors of what Russia sees as its so-called near abroad. Now, just imagine if it happened the other way around. Just imagine if at the end of the Cold War, the NATO had dissolved, as the Warsaw Pact dissolved, and the Warsaw Pact had expanded so that Belgium and Holland were now part of the Warsaw Pact. Then we'd have a reason to worry. And I detest the Putin regime. It's an authoritarian regime. But viewed from where they are, it's an understandable reaction to what's happened to them.
Is what I say. There is a big difference between trying to understand and justify someone.
Yes.
And this is, as you said before, the media help to put outside the context, so that people only see a sentence without context, and it's easy to say this is the villain and this is the good one. People want the black and white, the easy way to understand things.
Well, I think one of the most important things that people in the anti-war movement and on the left generally need to understand is all that you say about mainstream media is true, but that's the way in which ideas are formed vertically. A message coming from the top, you know, in the old days it would have been the church, from the top down into the parish, to form opinion according to how the establishment wanted to be formed. But that's only one of two ways in which people form ideas. They also form ideas horizontally. So they form ideas by talking to their workmates or people in their community, or in their church or their mosque or their synagogue, or they form ideas by being part of a trade union organisation or a political party. So they're not just listening to what the top are telling them. They're testing it against their own kind of experience. And you know, they say this about Hollywood films. You can put a Hollywood film in the top 10 films on its weekend of release just by advertising. But it won't stay there. To stay there, it's got to have word of mouth. Somebody you trust has got to come and say to you, that's a really brilliant film. You should go and see the best way. That. And I know that from my family. You know, I came from a working class family in Britain. And my dad, he was mainstream Labour. And we would always watch the Queen's Christmas broadcast. But there was one thing in our house that I learned, which other houses weren't learning, that whatever anybody else said about Winston Churchill being a great war leader. In our house, Winston Churchill was a bastard. And there was no discussion about that because Winston Churchill had sent troops to shoot at miners in South Wales, and my dad came from a South Wales mining family. So he partly accepted the story from above, but on some very important issues like trade unions and like reputation of Winston Churchill, he'd formed a completely different idea by what his family, his union, and what said. And we're there not to just counter what the top is telling the bottom. We're there to bolster what the bottom is already beginning to think. Its doubts and worries about the story it's hearing, and to give it the ideas and the arguments and the facts to bolster what it's learning horizontally and to refute what it's listening to vertically.
That's why even they use the media, the 90% of the media in Italy, to give a particular narrative about what's happening. In example, what we can answer. You make the example about trying to understand the reason of Russia that see coming close all the NATO countries. And someone can say, all right, but if I'm on those countries and I don't want to be under Russia power, I want to become a European. I want to become a NATO country. And they say, why these people cannot have the freedom to choose their fate and to become part of the European country or the NATO? What do we answer to these people?
That it won't be a defense. We have to unpack the question. Why do people say they want to be like that? Because they imagine that in those societies there is freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, free to be in a trade union, free to take strike action, that they think there's a good health service, a good education service. And we have to say to them, the more you accept this argument about rearmament, the less of those things you're going to have. You say you want to be European because you want to be relatively well off and relatively democratic, but the more you accept this argument, the less democratic and the less well off you're going to be. So let's look down, dig down into what people want out of their lives and speak to that. And also, by the way, the more genuinely democratic you are, the stronger your trade unions, the stronger your social movements, the more you protest, the safer you are, because nobody wants to invade a country that's got a live and vibrant resistance movement at its base. What they want is passivity. Yeah. And the more you listen to and passively obey your current establishment, the more attractive you look to a foreign establishment, because that's exactly what they're looking for.
Yes, it's true. Well, to end this very interesting interview, I want to ask you something about the last news. We have seen the Medellin ship have been taken over by Israeli forces from the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. I mean, it's something that for me and many others looks incredible, but for many others, it's like I interact continuously with people that are dehumanized. Like they don't feel no more the pressure to see someone die on the screen, someone kidnapped in international area, international sea.
I think that kind of, and there are some people that can watch that and not respond empathetically, but I think more people respond in that way not because they don't think it's terrible or horrible, but because they can't find a way or see a way to do anything about it. And if something bad is happening that you can't see a way to do anything about, why not just screen it out?
Yes.
And I think the key for the left is to show people that there is something that can be done about it.
Exactly.
But I think we're winning that argument. I mean, I don't know what the opinion polls are like in Italy, but in England now, 67% of people agree that the Israeli state is behaving in an unacceptable way. 57% of people want an arms embargo on Israel. And the demonstrations, I mean, I was involved in the Iraq War demonstrations, and they were huge, but the Palestine demonstrations are even bigger. We're coming up to 2 years now. We're on our 27th national demonstration, every one of which has had over 100,000 people, and some of which, the most recent one, for instance, had nearer 500,000 people on it. And I think what's happened is that the political legitimacy of the Israeli state and of those states supporting the Israeli state is in free fall. And although that doesn't stop Gazans being killed and murdered and displaced, yet it's heading in that direction. Because although the Israeli state is overwhelmingly militarily dominant and is fighting basically an armed population, no state can survive in the end without political legitimacy.
Yeah.
The Americans were more militarily powerful than the Vietnamese. The South African state was certainly more militarily powerful than the anti-apartheid movement.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, when it hemorrhages political legitimacy, in the end it can't sustain itself militarily. And I believe we're at that point.
I think we are in a turning point for Israel, but for what we thought is USA, what USA represent for all of us in Europe. In the public opinion, something is changed a lot. Even if not all of them come on the streets to protest. But yes, there are big numbers compared with the past of people coming on the street and to protest. We have seen even in Italy growing numbers. But there are even a lot of people that stop trust the TV because it's so different from the reality.
Yeah.
Stop trusting what is on the newspaper. There's still a newspaper in Italy that's still defending Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel.
Yeah.
But now we are to a point that even the media in Italy, there has been a big change in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Even those that 2 weeks ago were calling me or you anti-Semitic, now no more.
Yeah.
You can go in the square with the Palestinian flag. 2 weeks ago only it was not possible.
Yeah. No, the tide is turning, and our job is to make it turn more quickly and more conclusively.
And to be not poisoned by some movement that have other kind of interests, like human rights and things. Because this is the main issues when there are something very clean, a clean movement with passion, with heart, with meanings. Sometimes someone arrive and try to make it more like a party.
No, the movement has to welcome all parties, but it can't be the creature of any one party.
Exactly. Is what I think. I agree. Thank you, John.
Pleasure.
We keep the fight.
Yes, indeed.
Bye, guys.